Well, good morning. Welcome to the Deep 404. I think I need to start today's show just with a brief touch on what happened yesterday in Gaza. As America sat down to watch the Super Bowl, as there were some sort of pro-Israeli ads played during the Super Bowl, Benjamin Netanyahu followed through on his plans that he had organised, that he'd spoken of last week, that a hostage rescue mission would be undertaken in Rafah. This mission appears to have resulted in the release of 2 hostages safely. I understand it. There was, of course, also bombing in the area at the time, and reports are that there were at least 50 strikes in Rafah during that operation. 63 deaths at least yesterday, many of them, of course, children, and some of the most horrific footage and pictures that I've seen so far since this Gaza Israeli conflict has reignited on October the 7th. What's happening in Rafah, and if it continues, what happens in Rafah, it is beyond belief. If the Israeli Defense Force continues to bomb in Rafah, and if you don't know, the reason that this is becoming so bad, not to say it wasn't bad before, but so bad, is because the Israelis have systematically pushed the Palestinians from the north of Gaza through the centre of Gaza and down into the Rafah region, leaving them with nowhere else to go, and now bombing starting in there. There's an extra 1 million people in this area. If you haven't looked at what's going on there, if you're not across it, I suggest you get yourself onto X and Telegram and go and have a look, and perhaps get a slightly different view to what you might be seeing in the mainstream Western press. Anyhow, there is also some challenges there where the Egyptian government is starting to make noises that they are unhappy with Benjamin Netanyahu's plans to carry out operations in Rafah and also in the Philadelphia corridor, which is the strip or the region which separates the Sinai from Gaza. They have suggested that if Israel does do that, that may break the peace accord that they have, and Egypt will leave that peace accord, which will allow then Egypt to move missiles, troops, tanks, and that sort of thing to its border with Gaza and Israel. Whether the Egyptian President El-Sisi will do that, he is very friendly with the West, with the United States and Israel in general. However, his population must be putting pressure on him. So that's just one to see what happens there. On one last point, so during the Super Bowl yesterday, when this operation to release 2 hostages, which resulted in the deaths of at least 63 Palestinian civilians, most of them being children, President Joe Biden, from his personal account, released a tweet with just a few words, just like we drew it up. That was it. The assumption is that he's talking about the successful hostage release. It's a picture of Joe Biden with red laser eyes, the sort of image that a lot of crypto Bitcoin images you may have seen, that red laser eye thing, light emanating out. Many people commented on this as being very untactful, completely out of touch, and just weird and creepy, an unusual picture. I think I saw a post from Jordan Peterson calling it almost demonic, the picture of Joe Biden doing this at the same time that these 63 people had been killed in this operation. Anyhow, there's a lot about Ukraine that I want to talk about, and I'll get to some maps there in just shortly, but I'll just cover off some things to get us there first. The Houthis reports that they yesterday enacted 2 strikes or launched 2 missiles at a British ship in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This comes after a period of quietness from the Houthis. I think it's about a 6-day break where there hasn't been any reported activity there. That may have been due to some regrouping, repositioning needed after the US strikes on the Houthi positions in Yemen. But yesterday they appear to have started again, so still keeping pressure on the Red Sea and causing a lot of traffic to be diverted around. This is having an impact on Israel's economy. I did a report a week or so ago that on one of the major ports on Israel, on southern Israel, which borders down onto the Al-Aqaba entry into the Red Sea, that port is effectively going broke now. They've lost something like $3 billion already. It will be more than that now. They export materials and import cars for Israel. There's been effectively no traffic there since the Houthi blockade began. Yesterday, I saw some reporting that there has been, by one of the large financial institutions, Moody's perhaps, or someone like that, that Israel has its financial rating has been downgraded to a negative rating. Obviously, there are big impacts on the economy in Israel. In terms of tourism in Israel is suffering as well. People previously would have travelled a lot to Israel. Now they are more hesitant, not only because of the threat of possible attack from Hezbollah and Hamas and that sort of thing, but also just general opinion on Israel as a nation has changed for a large group of people over the last 3 months as they have seen this continued bombing of the people of Gaza. The US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, has been hospitalized again, and it seems that it has been done rather rapidly again. It's for an emergent bladder issue. No details given whether this is a spreading of the prostate cancer, perhaps, that he has reportedly had surgery for, or something else related to that is not clear. But his responsibilities have been handed over, transferred to his deputy. No indication given on how long he will be in hospital for. But he has not been well since whatever happened around after the 22nd, when he reportedly went in for surgery, and then that was the 22nd of December. Sorry, he went in for surgery, and then around the 1st of January this year, when he was moved into critical care for at least a number of days. Some reports I saw yesterday suggesting that he may have been moved back into a critical care unit. There's still more about this story for us to find out. I think we just haven't really been given the clear picture of what is going on with Lloyd Austin. It does raise the question, with him being like this for the last month or so, who is really leading the US defense and military response. He looks frail. He's lost a lot of weight. He's been in hospital for a long time. It is expected that he's been under some level of pain medication. So if he is, interesting to know if he's really in charge of what has been going on. This at the same time while people are questioning who's in charge of the United States in general, with the special counsel investigating Joe Biden about his mishandling of sensitive documents, stating in their report that he appears to be an old man with an limited ability to recall things, couldn't recall when his term as vice president ended, couldn't recall when his son had died, when Beau had died, reportedly. Clearly there are challenges there, and it is looking embarrassing. As an outsider, not as a US citizen, not someone based in the United States, looking at America now, it is concerning and embarrassing. When Trump was in power, there was obviously a lot of left MSNBC press trying to indicate that Trump was deranged and had lost his marbles. There was never any evidence for that. But with Biden, there is ample evidence of his cognitive decline. So it'll be interesting to see just what happens there. All right, moving more towards Ukraine then. The United Kingdom, both of its aircraft carriers are out of action. The Queen Elizabeth was meant to move last week to go and lead a battle group in the Steadfast Defender NATO operations, with operations going on in the Baltic Sea involving Norway and Finland and Sweden. Sweden, which is not yet a member of NATO, but they've been invited to these operations. The Queen Elizabeth, as she was about to take out, head up for sea, was detected some sort of propeller drive shaft problems, which has shut her down. And then the Prince of Wales, HMS Prince of Wales, was set to take her place yesterday, and at the last moment was also halted and has not left with the fleet. There are some reports from just an hour or so ago that the Prince of Wales may now be readied and will be leaving later today. But in either case, not a confident image being projected by the United Kingdom's Navy when both of the aircraft carriers are unable to leave for immediate deployment when required to. And now, this is only for exercises. Had they actually been required somewhere rapidly, they would not have been able to have achieved that, it seems. Ukraine. The last 48 hours have seen a definite crumbling of the Ukrainian line. I will go to a map in just a moment, and we'll look at some of that. There has been reports of a strike in Kharkov in Lyubodin, and which is apparently on the headquarters of a territorial defence unit of the armed forces of Ukraine. It was reportedly housed in a foreign language school building. There have been a number of strikes by the Russians on what appear to be groupings of Ukrainian headquarters, command centres, and amassings of either mercenaries or officer management level Ukrainian resources. Kharkov seems to have been the target of a number of these over the last few weeks. The French mercenaries struck a couple of weeks ago, one about a week ago, which reportedly killed up to 50 Ukrainian officers, management level, sort of members of the military. And now this attack, this strike on a headquarters. These strikes are carried out by large, powerful Russian missiles accurately targeted onto these buildings. The damage is usually extreme and significant, so it is likely that there would be a high number of losses and that this headquarters is now no longer operational. So a lot of activity in the Kharkov region. An interesting story coming out of Donetsk that the Russians have been working for the last 9 months on building a super train, the Tsar train, it's being called. Apparently, it is a collection of over 2,000 rail cars from an area south of Donetsk, maybe about 50 kilometres south of Donetsk, reaching up 30 kilometres. 2,100 rail cars reportedly in it. The exact purpose of it is not yet entirely clear. It will operate as a defensive barrier, of course. I'll just go to the map and show you from where roughly it is. Where's our map? Sorry, I'm not operating on a slightly different setup today. One of my computers is sick and I've just had to move to this one, but I think this will give us the map. There we go. So just zoom out a little bit for you. This is Donetsk here, and here this is Volnovakha here and reportedly starting from here and running up a train line to this position here, Avdeevka. This 30-kilometer line here is now apparently walled off effectively by a single continuous steel wall of train carriages. Just why it has been created and in this position, speculation is that it will operate as a secondary line of defense. So should there be a further future Ukrainian advance, that it operates just like a steel wall. Any troops that were to approach it would need to find a way to destroy rail cars, pull them off of the often raised rail line to be able to then breach and get through. Obviously, it allows ample locations for the Russians to be able to snipe from, to be able to shelter in, all of that sort of thing. There is some speculation that it may be used to in sections, that while it's being amassed here, what may happen is that sections of it will be broken off and driven forwards as the Russians advance, used perhaps as, again, shields or temporary barriers in some regions, not 30 kilometres in length, but smaller sections, perhaps a kilometre in length, used here and there. At this stage, no comment from the Ministry of Defence or the Russians about exactly what this is going to be used for, but an interesting development. So Avdeevka is falling, it is crumbling. Over the last 48 hours, there have been ongoing reports about the Russian advances through Avdeevka. And so the question then becomes what next? Avdeevka likely to fall, if not fall, then become as I could use the term, a meat grinder, in which the Russian forces are likely to inflict very heavy damage on the Ukrainians. The Russians, no doubt, are suffering heavy losses too in Avdeevka, but I don't believe that it is to the same extent as the Ukrainians will be. So our map here of Avdeevka, this red line is indicating roughly where the Russian forces have reportedly got to. This was done yesterday. There are reports of further advances, and that this road here, the Industrinya Prospect Road along here, which is fed in from the last supply road, that the Russians may even be closer to this now. As you can see, this area of Avdeevka in here, this line actually now can be, I know this can be moved because the Russians have actually removed and taken control all around this lake. That's just, we can see just here. So that line should really extend under here a little more. But the options for escape have really been reduced down to nearly nothing for the Ukrainians. It's estimated there might be between 1.5 to perhaps 2,000 troops remaining in Avdeevka. General Syrskyi, who has just taken over from General Zaluzhny, has reportedly committed to President Zelensky of Ukraine that he will hold Avdeevka, and reports are that he is now attempting to pull reserves from other areas, even from up Kupiansk areas up in the north, and other areas closer to Avdeevka, to try and reinforce. It is expected that those reinforcements will be used perhaps here, up above Krasnohorivka, around here, and Stepove, around this area here, to try to push down on the Russians and try to wrap around the pincer and cut some of the pincer off here and relieve some pressure. Also perhaps coming in to try to do a similar thing around this bottom area that the Russians hold. He will need to be quick if he's going to do that and actually have any success with holding Avdeevka. With Avdeevka effectively being cut in the middle now, there are two groups, a southern group of Ukrainian forces left and a northern group in the coke plant area. Yesterday, footage and reports of the coke plant being pummeled is the word, I guess, being struck by Fab 500 bombs. There are reports that there's something like 65 or 70 of these landing in Avdeevka each day or more now. The group that is in the southern part here is really effectively surrounded. Any attempts that they make to escape and retreat, they will be under intense Russian fire. I think they've pretty much reached the point now where they have the option of calling the Volga channel. The Volga channel is a channel the Russians have set up for the Ukrainians to use. It's monitored all the time. If they wish to surrender, they can use that frequency to call out that they want to surrender. I think the Ukrainians have reached the point in the southern part of Avdeevka that they either make that decision to surrender or they will lay down their lives in the fight for Avdeevka because they are now effectively surrounded. In the coke plant area, there's more opportunity for those to be able to evacuate out to the west. However, they would be doing so through open fields under fire control of the Russians. So small numbers of men running out over the fields, managing to avoid the FPV drones. They may make it back to somewhere like Lastochne or Livka, perhaps. But again, the chances for them even to do that are very, very low without surrender. So as we see Avdeevka falling. If we just look here, I'm just going to go to another map here. Now, this is a pro-Ukrainian map, but I just want to show you a little bit here. And what is of interest, if you can see these yellow, I'll make it a little larger. If you can see these orange areas here on Kherson, here in Zaporozhye region, these orange areas up here, all of them through the Donetsk area, through here, Bakhmut, west and north of Lysychansk, through here, and up to the Kupiansk region. All of these orange areas are the recently claimed Russian territory that's been taken in the recent days. Now, this is a pro-Ukrainian map that I'm using here. So in a number of cases, the Russian claimed areas of control are larger than what is being shown on this ISW map. This is the Institute for Study of War map, which are American group, but pro-Ukrainian. So you can see here around Avdeevka. Again, I believe some of their areas, claimed areas here, are not as advanced as where some of the Russian forces actually are. But you can see at this top area here, the area that Syrskyi would be perhaps looking to try to attack around here. The Russians are still advancing. Avdeevka itself, major advances by the Russians over the last few days all around this area. So it's very likely that Avdeevka itself will fall in the coming days or weeks, and that starts to then beg the question of, what next and what will happen after that. Pokrovsk here is a likely sort of next target from this region. Kurakov here, also another one. Seldova. These are the likely positions that the Russians will force their way out to as they look to move westward from this region. Let's just zoom out a little bit more. The idea that a lot of people are suggesting is that the Russians will look to take the oblast of Ukraine to the east of the Dnieper River. So if we just go back to our map here, this is the Dnieper River. Here's Kiev, and the Dnieper runs down here through Cherkasy, down here to Dnipropetrovsk, down to Zaporozhye, along here down to Kherson and the Black Sea. So the red area here is the area which is currently occupied by Russia, or has been claimed as Russian territory now by Russia. There has been a lot of activity in recent weeks around Kharkiv. In this area here, a lot of strikes on build-up of troops and of military locations around Kharkiv. We have seen recent pushes and advances starting, while not a small indication here, but advances by the Russians in this far western part of Zaporozhye here. This is just on the eastern edge of the Novokhovka reservoir, and the pushes are starting to be made by the Russians here, where they would look to move their way up to the outskirts of Zaporozhye itself. The distance isn't far from here. It's probably 50 kilometers or something from where the Russians are now to the outskirts of Zaporozhye. Now this reservoir itself is interesting. The reservoir was, until last year when the Novokhovka dam was destroyed, was a large body of water. But as you can see on this map now, it's indicating that really has been reduced just to a main river flow through here. It has been, I guess, near 9 months now, so there has been some time for this riverbed to dry out. And we have had reports that just opposite the Enerhodar nuclear power plant, this is the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which the Russians control, that strikes on Nikopol have begun to start again. These are Russian strikes on Nikopol. The Ukrainians control all of the land above the reservoir and the river. The Russians control all the land below. So the thinking here is that perhaps due to the drying out of that reservoir bed, the Russians have now found a position where they feel they may be able to get across what was 5 kilometre stretch of water, which is now perhaps a 100-metre stretch of a river, perhaps less in some areas, on a reservoir bed that may have had time to dry out enough now that it can support the movement of heavy equipment. And perhaps this is why we're starting to see an uptick in the activity and strikes and shelling on Nikopol here. Oh, sorry. Due to my setup today, I can't have myself on the screen at the same time as the map. So it's not that I don't want to be looking at you and talking. It's just that I can't with this setup. But at this map, so here's Nikopol here. We've got Russian advances here, and this is the Dnieper River coming down this way. So there are some thoughts that everything to the east the Russians will ultimately look to take, and also that it is highly likely that the Russians will want to take Mykolaiv and Odessa. By doing so, they would deprive Ukraine of port access. They may choose to allow Ukraine access down through Mykolaiv and Odessa to the ports, but these ports will become Russian controlled. So then we start to think about the recent activity where we have had again an uptick in the Kherson region of Russian forces pushing back, claiming area right along the river here, and striking all along a line along the western side, or the right-hand side, the Ukrainian-controlled side of the Dnieper River around Kherson. A range of strikes have been happening along here. Now, this may be in preparation to look to be able to push back the Ukrainian forces from the river line in Kherson here, and allow the Russians to be able to breach the river and again move over here. Now, the Russians were there in 2022, they were across the river, but growing concerned, it seems, with the likelihood that the Novokhovka Dam might be destroyed, as it was, and that their positions on the left bank of the river would be washed out and they would suffer troop losses, or if that happened, if the Antonovsky Bridge was cut, that their troops on the west or north of the Dnieper River in Kherson would become isolated. They made a decision and withdrew back over the river. Now, as the idea of figuring out how to take Mykolaiv and Odessa probably moves more to the forefront of the Russian planning, figuring out how to get across the Dnieper is something that they will be looking to do. And so softening up Kherson, getting it to a position where they can push back with artillery, the Ukrainian forces, to allow them to establish some bridges across, temporary bridges, pontoon bridges, that sort of thing across the Dnieper, and be able to move in here, is something which I think we might start to see. We might also, I think, start to see, let me just zoom in a little bit again. We might start to see similar activity around Nikopol. The Russians from the far west of their line here, in Liman and Donetsk, they have a long way to travel if they wish to go directly across to get to Dnipro and to Zaporozhye, to the Dnieper River here. However, if they were to start to push forces up, as they seem to be making some advances to the east of the Novokhovka reservoir bed here, then they can start to push up, put pressure on Zaporozhye. If they send some forces across from Nikopol, they can break right and head up and again put pressure and contain Zaporozhye, and allow Russian forces to get behind the ones keeping Zaporozhye cut off on this side, and move up the Dnieper. They can move up and use the Dnieper as a barrier on their left flank. In this case, if you're looking to travel and move forces this way, this gives you an area where you have some level of protection given, due to the river itself. So the Russians could use that, move up, continue to move up until they get to Dnipro and Dnipropetrovsk, this area here. And then there is talk that then from here, if the Russians reach Dnipro, they might look to then move across here to the right to Pavlograd, and here join up with forces that may have been pushing down from through here somewhere, looking to join at Pavlograd, roll up the river this way, move across to Pavlograd, and then look to effectively cut off this entire area of Ukrainian forces, encircle them, starve them out, and then perhaps do a similar move to then go around Dnipro, not look to take all of Dnipro at this stage, but move up to as far as, say, Kremenchuk here, and then push down from here, from the Belgorod region, meeting at Poltava perhaps, and chew off another area like this. Now, this sort of activity, This is a lot of effort. It's hard to achieve. But if the Russians do start to do this, and if they do start to starve out a large region here, it puts a lot of pressure on Kiev. Kiev can see what is going to happen. They can see that slowly all of these oblasts are going to be eaten up. And it increases the political pressure such that the Russians may be able to force Ukraine into a negotiation. So Russia doesn't have to actually, or it doesn't have to necessarily achieve this goal of capturing all of this land by force east of the Dnieper. The other option is that they start it, they show their intent, and they begin to gain success and put enough pressure on Zelensky, effectively, to be able to draw him to the negotiating table and say, we can continue this at great loss to Ukraine, or you can just surrender at this stage and accept that we will take these oblasts without us destroying all of that area. The other thing that the Russians may look to do as part of this adding pressure is, as I say, break through Nikopol, establish an access point across the Dnieper there, perhaps get down to the Novokhovka dam. Now, there is a bridge there. Now, it has been destroyed. The dam has been destroyed, but repair could be carried out on that to allow Russian forces to also get across there. Then Kherson, the Antonovsky Bridge, this area here, there could be pontoon work done, some repair work done, and this would then allow the Russians a number of locations to be able to move heavy equipment across. There is, of course, if the Russians were to capture an area where they felt that they could actually create an airfield and land larger craft in here, this would become risky for them. But depending on their success, they could do something like that and establish even a landing base just over the line here to allow them to fly in some heavy equipment. But this is the challenge that the Russians have. If they wish to move down and take Mykolaiv down here and Odessa, they need to get across the Dnieper, and they need to get heavy equipment across the Dnieper. So this is why I think things like Nikopol and this push here just to the east of the reservoir, and perhaps a Novokhovka dam road being repaired, are things that we might see to allow the Russians to move across, establish footholds here, establish routes in which they can then push heavy equipment across. And then I think for Mykolaiv, it's likely that the Russians will go up and around Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv doesn't have a great deal of support behind it. It's quite isolated. The Russians, if they are able to get up and cut these main roads into Mykolaiv, it's difficult for the Ukrainians to support it. And once they've cut this main road here on the west between Neshiane and Vesniane, they've also cut then one of the main roads into Odessa. And again, there's not a great deal through here that is reinforced for the Ukrainians to use to defend the Russians. The Russians can then move across and start to then move down, sweep down, and cut the access roads into Odessa until they get to this corner here of Moldova. Once the Russians get to there, then they have effectively taken all of this Odessa region that's been cut off. Also, in an attack on Odessa and Mykolaiv, the Russians have their naval capability as well. So it's possible that they would look to bring some of the ships up to assist with deploying troops into areas where they could then attack Odessa, dropping tanks and that sort of thing via ship. There, of course, would be challenges. The Ukrainians have made very effective use of sea drones in that area. But if the Russians were looking to do some sort of an amphibious landing somewhere along there in support of a ground operation going around Mykolaiv and sweeping down to Odessa, they certainly could do that. They've got ample air cover in the area. They will have their own anti-drone electronic warfare technology that they'll be able to use. And they have been making repeated strikes on the warehouses and facilities within Odessa where they believe a lot of these sea drones are assembled and launched from. And as I've said before, the problem of the sea drones may be one which the Russians are looking to resolve not by counteracting all of the sea drones, but instead by ultimately taking Odessa and Mykolaiv, and that way shutting down the launch and production and assembly of all of those sea drones by cutting Ukraine's access to the sea in its entirety. So these are some of the things. I'm absolutely no military expert. I have no military experience in preparing battles like this. But by looking at the map, by looking at what the Russians are doing, just by considering natural, topographical, geographical features that would give them assistance, like running up and down rivers, I think the same thing is likely to happen in Kupiansk with the Oskol River, where once the Russians either take Kupiansk or move south of it to the Oskol, they will then use that as a natural protective barrier on their right flank and will roll down the Oskol River. Then again, cutting off and encircling a large group of Ukrainian forces in that northern Kupiansk area. So by looking at these sort of things, just looking at, for example, if we go to Avdeevka, in Avdeevka, looking at the major locations to the west, where the major crossroads are, gives you a fair indication of where the Russians are likely to travel to next. In fact, where they need to travel to if they want to then, for example, get to Pokrovsk, and how they would need to break around Mirohad and Rodnitsky, and perhaps take these areas as well to be able to allow them to then cut the supply roads into Pokrovsk. The thing that we may see now is after Avdeevka falls, we may see a increase in the pace of Ukrainian towns falling, because Avdeevka was a heavily fortified concrete and steel position, 10 years of fortification. Many of these areas to the west of Avdeevka haven't had the same level of fortification applied to them, and so they will be softer, easier targets. Some of the smaller locations, the Russians will just take this technique of using artillery and Fab 500s to level the townships and villages, leaving nowhere for the Ukrainians to hide and fight from, pushing them back. And again, if they're pushed back into another poorly defended location, then this can become a bit of a rout as the Ukrainians are unable to build a defensive location to defend from, and they keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Once situations like that start to happen in areas, you start to get gaps in the line. Once you get gaps in the line, this gives the Russians the ability to pierce the line and then spread around left and right, rolling around behind the front line of the Ukrainian forces. So you widen the line, the gap there, allows you to then drive forward and insert and choose to again break left or right to cut supply roads into the cities and towns that you're trying to capture. I think that we are probably likely to see, if what we've seen in the last 24 hours has been tactical advances, and by that I mean I think what we've seen along the line, all those areas of orange, haven't been big strategic moves and offensives. These have been the crumbling of the Ukrainian line due to lack of manpower, due to a lack of equipment and a lack of an ability to repair and resupply that equipment, due to the months of nightly drone and missile strikes the Russians have enacted on the Ukrainian manufacturing, assembly, fabrication, repair and supply stocks. This has just made it near impossible, it seems, for the Ukrainians to be able to resupply men and machinery at the front line. So this crumbling, pockets falling over, I think that's what we're seeing here is tactical advances. The frightening thing for Zelensky and Zelensky is that these tactical wins for the Russians are happening all along the front line. It's not just one orange spot, it's all along. So the Russian Minister for Defense, Sergei Shoigu, talks about Russia holding the strategic initiative. I think we're seeing the tactical benefits of that now, and that may roll for some time. Just this piece by piece by piece by piece, a few kilometres here and there each day, pushing the Ukrainians back, keeping them on the back foot, allowing Russia to roll up, choose where it wants to create defensive positions, and then supply further troops through there. This is a very fortunate position, I think, for the Russian army to be in at this stage, if they do then wish to enact some big moves. And as I say, those big moves might be from Zaporozhye to push up and go around the east of Zaporozhye and start to work up the river. That's going to put a lot of pressure on Kiev to make some decisions, as they can see the Russians coming not only in from the far east, but up right through the heart of Ukraine. And the other one, figuring out a way to take Odessa and Mykolaiv. Again, if the Russians do push over through Kherson and perhaps over the Novokhovka bridge, if they manage to repair, they don't need to repair the dam, just repair a bridge that they can travel across, establish a base there on the other side of the Dnieper, and then begin to move down to Mykolaiv. That can be supplemented with heavy air attacks and the Russian Navy moving in to provide some level of artillery cover from the sea, as also amphibiously deploy heavy equipment into Odessa region. Once Odessa and Mykolaiv are cut off, that shuts down all of that sea drone activity for the Ukrainians, and the Russians then end up with full control of the Black Sea without any naval drone capability of Ukraine coming into play. So, yeah, that might be what we're seeing. Again, this is of course all speculation on my behalf, but the way that the front seems to be moving in the last couple of days, I think we're going to see that continue, and then I think that sets the stage for a bigger move, a large-scale move. And I think logically it probably makes sense that they look to move up the Dnieper. They move in from Kharkiv and Sumy to try to meet there in the middle, and start to make some sort of an advance on Mykolaiv and Odessa. Either way, if these offensives are planned and they are ultimately to be successful, then the Russians will militarily take those positions. But even if they don't, if the intent becomes clear, and the forces begin to move that way, as I say, that then puts a lot of pressure on Kiev, on President Zelensky, to come to the negotiating table and effectively save large swaths of Ukraine being destroyed and his armed forces being destroyed further when he could negotiate his way to some sort of a settlement. Okay, I'll leave that there today. Look, I hope you're having a good week. If you are enjoying the channel and you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. Feel free to share it with people that you think might enjoy the channel. I'm also on X, Twitter now. So, yeah, have a good day. I'll talk to you soon.